Every manager, business owner, and founder I've ever spoken to has had at least one story about a bad manager, inept leader, or horrible boss that they've had the misfortune to work for. And when I have those conversations on an almost daily basis, it is sometimes hard to understand where we're going wrong in the business world and wider society when it comes to developing the right kind of leadership. Thank you for joining me today and welcome. This is Leading with Integrity Leadership Talk, the podcast for first-time managers who want to be more effective, people-first leaders and are leading tech-driven teams. Join me each week and you will learn the strategies, mindsets, and practical tips that successful modern leaders follow to be the kind of engaging, ethical, and authentic managers who are best at building trust, respect, engagement, and ultimately able to get the most from their teams. We achieve all of this through weekly conversations with leaders, leadership experts, entrepreneurs, and business owners, all of whom have already walked this path and have compelling stories and brilliant insight to share, with an added sprinkling of occasional solo episodes and even a few group interviews with more than one participant. My name is David Hatch and I am your host. Leadership has always been something I've had a passion for, and after a career spent in a series of small businesses during many years in the aerospace industry and several years in the UK space sector, I have seen the impact of great leadership and the dangers of poor leadership. What I've learned from that is that the secret to successful management lies in your ability to apply great leadership. And the secret to great leadership? Well, as the name of the podcast suggests, it's all about your integrity. Leading by example, putting people before profits, and basically just not being an a-hole. Today, I help new and first-time managers be more effective, more engaging, and more successful as leaders, whilst avoiding the burnout, stress, disinterested staff, the flagging morale, the failing outputs, the low productivity, and all the other harmful problems that tend to crop up around bad or absent leadership. I care about all of this because we've all had that bad manager experience at least once in our career. Bad leadership seems to be everywhere. It seems to be the norm rather than the exception. But it doesn't have to be, and it shouldn't be. And because making that transition from practitioner to manager, being that new leader for the first time, going from doing the work to leading the work, is really tough. It can be the most difficult change many people will face in their entire careers, but it's almost certainly going to be the most difficult they have faced so far in their career. It's also where you're going to be least likely to get access to leadership development and most likely to struggle with confidence, imposter syndrome, and lacking knowledge in how best to lead. So that's what I am all about. Helping you managers be more effective via better leadership skills. And I focus on tech-driven small businesses and startups and the managers who work within them, because I have lived that journey myself and I understand it well. I'm on a mission to spread great leadership far and wide as I can. And one of the ways that I'm doing that is with this podcast.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Welcome back, listeners, to part 4 of our mini-series on the power of great leadership. The final part, how to be a more successful manager. And this episode is closing out our run of bonus episodes this month, which you may remember I've been doing as a celebration of passing our 50 episode milestone here at Leading with Integrity. So how to be a more successful manager? Well, the short answer to that question is in the way I sign off every episode. Be a leader, not a boss. Lead with integrity as well is a big clue. I have a couple of goals in mind for this episode. Firstly, we're going to recap the first 3 parts of the mini-series just very quickly to remind ourselves about what we've learned so far. Then I'm going to give you some recommendations in the form of 5 pointers for your leadership strategy and 5 weekly practices or tactics that you could apply straight away to improve your leadership approach. And as an added bonus and thank you, if you do listen all the way to the end of this episode, I'm also going to offer up an extra little treat for you to help you even more when it comes to taking the next steps. Everyone has had that bad manager experience at least once in their career. Bad leadership apparently is everywhere. But it shouldn't be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. Great leadership is certainly never easy, but it can sometimes be simple. There's no quick fix, but there are always things we can do to improve. Every week on this podcast, we hear the stories and experiences of leaders, experts, entrepreneurs who have all made mistakes and learned lessons about leadership. Almost without exception, they also all have a story about struggling to adjust to their first management role earlier in their career. And that's something that any new leader can find solace in. You're not alone in that experience, and there are people who can help. Week in and week out, you and I are privileged to benefit from the insight and experience of some truly inspiring leaders who show us that leadership is a calling and not just a tool to get rich quick. And that's really a central message of the role and power of great leaders to make people's lives better, especially at work, where, after all, we all spend so much of our lives, or our waking lives at least. I don't know, maybe you are napping at work. No judgment here. In the previous 3 episodes of this mini-series, you've heard from me about my own new manager story and the mistakes that I made in that early stage of my career, as well as the lessons I learned from that, particularly about avoiding those old school management techniques and leaning into the adaptable, empathetic, and supportive approaches to leadership. You've also heard about providing autonomy and empowerment and a collaborative environment and the impact of authenticity and honesty for building the trust that is essential for leadership success. You've also heard the dangers of the autocratic dictator type of leadership, why that isn't effective anymore, and how to avoid doing it. And then last week in part 3, I talked about 4 big mistakes that leaders can make through the lens of real-world examples and stories. So we saw how allowing or mishandling bullying and harassment can destroy a business. The damage that micromanagement does to morale, productivity, and staff engagement. The negative impact a leader who isolates themselves from the team has on its culture. And the diminishing returns that result from a leader stealing credit from their team. So in a nutshell, we've heard plenty about what not to do. In this final part of the mini-series, then, I wanted to focus on what to do. What practices will stand you in good stead as you develop your leadership persona. And we'll begin by talking in quite high-level strategic terms about the 5 things you need to get right to be a successful leader. And 5, you may already have noticed, is going to be a recurring number in this episode. By accident, I assure you. I wanted 4 since it's part 4, but I probably got a bit carried away. However you cut it, however you look at it, leadership is a tough skill to master. There is a huge volume of theoretical material around. There's loads of stuff on the internet. You've only got to type leadership into Google and you'll see that for yourself. But when it comes to getting it right in practice, when dealing with the real messy side of people and leading, many new managers, many first-time business owners, and even experienced serial entrepreneurs fall at the first hurdle. And when you talk about leadership in a small, technically specialist startup type of business, it tends to be even more challenging. And one of the reasons for that is because in a smaller organization, there's fewer places to hide. And so your actions as a leader can have a disproportionate impact compared to being a first-time manager in a big corporate, for example. Knowing where to start is half the battle. And that's where these 5 fundamental strategies for leadership come in. And these are what you'll want to focus on in your new role as a leader, as a first-time manager. Number 1 is building trust. Number 2, communicating. Number 3, example. Number 4, empathy. And number 5, teamwork. And that's by no means a complete list of all the things a leader has to do to get it right and to be successful as a manager. But what they do represent is a short list of some key strategies where you can start and how to think about your actions or interactions with your colleagues. So let's talk about each of these in a little bit more detail then. So number 1, building trust is vital for effective leadership. If your team, your colleagues, maybe even your own manager, if you're partway up an organizational structure, if those people don't trust you, then you will find it incredibly difficult to perform well in any role that requires good leadership. It's very key to remember that trust goes both ways. It's reciprocal in nature. And that can have an impact both in terms of risking the loss of trust, but also in the way that you approach building it. So what that really means is one great way that you can earn trust is by demonstrating trust in others. For example, show that you trust your team by avoiding tactics such as micromanaging, which we've spoken about in the previous episode at quite some length. Instead, empower them to decide how best to complete their work. Give them that autonomy to decide what, when, and how as much as you can. Accepting, of course, that in certain environments, certain businesses, certain offices, the degree to which you can do that may be quite limited. Treating everyone with respect is another key behavior that generates trust. And again, this doesn't need to be complicated. Your day-to-day choices make a big difference. So to give you another example, something simple like just showing up to a meeting or a phone call on time, and therefore showing that you respect other people's time, can go a long way in building their respect for you. Leaders who build excellent levels of trust are able to do so because they are honest, open, and truthful, and because they demonstrate trust and respect in other people. These leaders create and support organizational cultures that are built on that mutual respect, on the empowerment that I spoke about earlier, and on authenticity. All of these elements build trust with the team, which several detailed workforce surveys have shown to be rising in importance for employees in recent years. As the general level of uncertainty in the world has risen, so has people's need for trustworthy leadership. Number 2, good communication is also a crucial skill for any leader. You've heard me speak about that at great length in numerous episodes already, but successful leaders are the ones who develop a clear strategy and then effectively and consistently communicate that to their team, to their people. Effective communication does mean consistency and clarity. So be clear in the way that you impart the strategy, the values, the goals. But it also means listening well. There's the old adage, isn't there? Everyone trots this one out. You've got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Okay, that's a bit cliche by now. But the key skill that you want to hone as a new leader is your ability to engage in a dialogue about things like strategy, involving colleagues and team members in its creation in that goal-setting process. And in this way, helping to build buy-in across the entire organization, because people are going to be more invested in, more bought into goals, objectives, strategies, plans that they have had a hand in creating and defining. And I do say the whole organization there, because to make this truly useful, the strategic and goal-oriented communication must be consistently done by all leaders at all levels throughout an entire organization, from the supervisory level, from the new managers, right the way up to the chiefs and the CEOs at the top. Now, a lot of that may be out of your hands, but your part in that as a new manager is to make sure that you're doing it well for your team, for the people that you are responsible for. And there's only so much you can do about anything outside of that. Number 3, I've been using the phrase, be a leader, not a boss, when I sign off every week for years now. And there's a reason for that. It's because, to my way of thinking, this idea is closely tied into leading by example. And I've spoken about the example imperative and this idea of moral authority before. But to me, this core element is the crux of the difference between a leader and a boss. A boss will say, do as I say, not as I do, and demand your obedience. Whereas a leader will say, we need to do this because, what do you think? How can we do this? And then they will help you to actually implement and achieve that thing. In a nutshell, leading by example means holding yourself to the same standard as everyone else and not expecting anyone else to do something that you're not prepared to do yourself. Leadership is more complex than that, of course, but this is a core element that you or any other leader needs to get right before they're going to succeed. It applies to everything from your top level values and vision right the way down to the nitty gritty, the day-to-day stuff. And it's so crucial because of this idea of moral authority. It is extremely difficult, if not impossible, to expect others to do things a certain way, to follow a certain strategy or live up to a values statement if their leader is not also doing so. Why would anyone follow a leader who isn't practicing what they preach, putting their money where their mouth is, etc.? I wouldn't. Would you? Number 4, empathy is another part of leadership that has seen growing recognition in the last decade or so, and particularly in the last 2 or 3 years with everything that the world and the workplace have been through. And it's another recurring theme that we hear from guests on Leading with Integrity too. Listen again to episode 55 for a great recent example of that. Few would disagree that to be a great leader, you need to understand your team. That means knowing what motivates them versus what demoralizes them. It means knowing what they care about, what stresses them out, what their goals and concerns are for their job, for life, career, all of those things. And you need to combine this empathy with the listening element of good communication that I mentioned just now, and the supporting part of trust building. You need to be able to care about your team members in a greater sense than simply being worried about whether they will meet the next deadline. If you can get this right, then you'll be making sure that your team members feel valued, both individually and collectively. They'll feel that you care about them and that you are willing to offer them help and support, not just for their daily tasks or jobs, but for their career goals and the welfare of each individual. And that is the kind of leadership that inspires people to follow throughout hard times. It's the kind of leadership that they remember in the easy times, and that will produce the best results in a whole range of measures, from team engagement, loyalty and retention, productivity, business performance, and more. But importantly, it is its own end as well, and shouldn't ever be the means to an end. And for strategy number 5, look, it's no secret that good teamwork makes any organization better, whether in terms of productivity, output, revenue, or collaboration, or any one of a dozen other measures that we could pick. If your leadership is well focused on the first 4 strategies that I've spoken about so far, then the chances are good that you're already going to be encouraging that excellent kind of teamwork as a net result of doing each of those other 4 things. To really take it to the next level, you can focus on some of the smaller team building exercises, the motivational type of things, the day-to-day interactions that you can use to build that up even further. Good leadership is strategic, but part of that strategy is recognizing that it's also in the small stuff too. As a leader, your goal is to ensure a cohesive, united team who understand and share common values and goals, who have the right environment and tools to succeed, and who are able to work well together, playing on each other's strengths and able to cover each other's weaknesses when needed. So think strategically about how you, the leader, are going to work in those small details that will help this happen, that will cement this as part of your team. Whether that be a series of weekly team building exercises, or a buddy mentoring system, or something more straightforward like a team lunch or a social outing every every other week or once a month or something. This kind of detail helps to build a consistent culture where people are happy at work and enjoying their jobs. So to summarize again, those 5 strategic thinking areas to develop your leadership and your team. 1, building trust. This is essential for a productive leader-follower relationship. 2, communication. Doing it consistently and transparently pays huge dividends for all of the other 4 areas we've talked about. 3, example. I've talked about that one at great length in several episodes in the past, but leading by example is core to the success of your leadership and to leading with integrity. 4, empathy. Again, this is central to your ability to understand and engage with your team members, which is crucial to your ability to get the best out of them and to ensure that they are getting the best out of their roles. 5, teamwork makes the dream work, right? Cliche phrases aside, great teamwork is the goal of what you're doing as a leader at the end of the day, and it builds from doing all of the other 4 things that I've mentioned. A final thought to add as well on your mindset. Remember that a good leader is concerned with supporting their people and is more focused on the outputs and the end goals than with controlling every step of the process or on having some kind of tunnel vision focus on the short-term gains. To be a really great and successful leader, you've got to be thinking long-term and you've got to be focused on your people. Think of your role as guiding and supporting and creating and maintaining the environment for others to succeed. Okay, so strategic leadership thinking is done. Tick. Next, let's talk more tactically about the practical, everyday leadership that you can apply. Here are 5 things that you can do this week to be a better leader. I've tried to keep these more simple and practical, although, as you probably already know, things are very rarely simple when you're in a management role. If you're new to leading or maybe struggling to make headway, then hopefully this will give you some ideas to try and make progress by the end of the week, unless you're listening to this at 4:30 p.m. on a Friday, in which case it's probably a bit late for this week, so maybe next week. Which actually is better because then you've got the weekend to think about it more. There we go. Done you a favour by releasing this on a Friday. Anyway, let's not get lost in the time dilation of the internet. I've got 5, yes, 5 of them again, I told you. Simple leadership tactics for you to try, and they are: first, check-in; second, personal development; third, leadership catch-up; fourth, strategy review; and fifth, act. What do I mean by those? Well, let's see. Number 1 then, check in with your people. Have a chat with each of your team members over the course of this week. Try to get a feel for how they're managing their workload and their stress levels. Ask how they're enjoying their job this week. Open a discussion about what they're not enjoying at work and try to use that to identify or explore some things you might be able to do to improve it. You could also discuss non-work topics, perhaps hobbies, plans for the weekend, any other common ground that you have that can help you strengthen your connection, your relationship with each individual. Also, think about having a weekly check-in with the whole team, where everyone's in the same place or the same Zoom room, at least. Only needs to be 15 minutes or so a week. It will just really help with that team bonding, gelling that you need to help improve teamwork more generally. Another way to do this, which I'm a huge advocate for, especially if you all work in the same location, once a month, go out for lunch together as a whole team. I really can't recommend that highly enough for team building. P.S. Good practice is for the manager to foot the bill on this one if you're in position to do so. Again, would highly recommend that. Hopefully you get the idea though. The goal here is to better understand the people you work with, help them to better understand you too, and generally build on an existing relationship, or if you're very new, start to build a relationship, because this will help you to be a better leader to those specific people, and it will also help them to better support you as their leader. Second one, think about personal development for your team. What have you done? What have you personally put in place for them in this regard? What else could you do? Are you doing the best that you can to give everyone in your team the opportunity to access new training and develop new skills? And are you taking those opportunities yourself as well? Personal development works best when it's an ongoing conversation that you're having with each member of your team and that your manager is having with you, if you have one. It's not about an annual performance appraisal. I actually hate those, by the way, and the way that many companies do them. And if you want to hear me and a guest or two talk about why and maybe rant about it a little bit, then you can check out episodes 30, 38, or 39 as a good place to start. What personal development is about is upskilling your team and your people as well as yourself. It's a vital part of any leader's job description to promote and encourage the personal development of all the people they're responsible for, and yes, again, including themselves. Good managers should also be taking steps towards their own training and development and have a training plan in place for their entire team. For your leadership to really, truly succeed and get the best from people, you must have a positive attitude towards learning and training. Make every effort to ensure your team are appropriately trained in their roles and are regularly offered opportunities to expand their knowledge and skills. It is also really important to involve each individual in the discussion and the decision about their own personal development, hence the word personal in the title. To get the best outcome for people and for the team as a whole, both sides need to have input into that process of identifying strengths, weaknesses, next steps, areas for improvement, and most importantly, on development and career planning. These are not about the manager or the company's choices. Personal development should be led by the individual. Okay, off the soapbox now. The more skills, knowledge, and qualifications that people have access to, the better all of you will perform in your individual roles, but also collectively as a team. So as the leader, you should want that, and I'm sure you do. More importantly, if you and your organization are taking an interest in and investing time or money, ideally both, in people's training, then this will build loyalty and commitment throughout the team, which again, you should want for two reasons. Firstly, the cost of replacing someone who leaves, say because they're not being given access to development or training or opportunities for progression. That cost is going to be upwards of 300% of their salary today. Secondly, the old adage of what if we train people and they leave versus what if we don't and they stay. Number 3, leadership catch up. If the first two tactics I've offered are about the people and about yourself, then this one is about the team as a whole. It is useful to keep up with the health of the whole organisation and any goings on that you need to be aware of, if only because it makes you better equipped to field questions from the people you're leading. And I do recommend setting aside some time to talk to other managers or leaders within your business on a regular basis. The purpose of this is to check the pulse of the company, to see what your colleagues might know that you don't, what's going well, what's not, what are people in the business worried about, and so on. It's keeping your finger on the pulse. It's being the plugged-in leader who can preempt the tough conversations and the tough questions by having the answers ready. It's also important to discuss what each of you as leaders are individually and collectively doing to acknowledge and address any issues whilst applauding the positives. If you're the new manager or the more junior leader in this scenario, don't assume this doesn't apply to you. It's not just about the CEO. All leaders in an organization need to be on the same page and should be regularly communicating with each other, just as they do with their teams. Number 4 is strategy review. Strategic planning and goal setting are long-term activities, and we've talked already about the strategic level of your leadership. But what that doesn't mean, what that shouldn't mean, especially for objectives and goal setting, is that you're only thinking about it once a year. A good leader will be regularly reviewing the strategy for their organization, for their team. They'll be considering those goals, the progress so far, the lessons learned. And there's 2 reasons why this matters. First one is regularly reviewing those strategic goals is really important to make sure that everything is staying on track and remaining relevant. And if at any point you think it's not, part of your role as a new manager, as a team leader, is to flag that so it can be addressed. The second one is you also need to be on the same page as all the organization's leaders or managers, as I just mentioned in number 3. And each of you need to be checking that vision and mission are being consistently understood and communicated throughout. If you are that new manager, or you consider yourself lower down in the company, and I say that with inverted commas, but you obviously can't see that unless you're watching on YouTube, I don't know. What I'm trying to say here is that even as a new manager on that first rung of the ladder, it is still important to keep yourself up to date with what the long-term goals are across the whole business, and to understand how you and your team are contributing towards it. If those answers aren't clear to you, then don't shy away from asking questions until they are. That's also one of your responsibilities as a leader or manager, no matter how many people or how few people you're responsible for. Why? Because as we've seen, part of good leadership is empowering your people to make their own decisions. But they can't do that if you can't tell them what those expectations are, what the end goals are, and where they fit into that roadmap of strategy and delivering it. So I'm not suggesting you do this one every week, maybe once a month, maybe every fortnight, whatever feels best and most useful to you. Number 5, the final thing I recommend you do this week is simply to act on everything you've learned from the other 4 things. I say simply, but of course it probably won't be all that simple in practice. And there's going to be a lot of outputs from all of these discussions and following these tactics that I've suggested. And sometimes that is going to be too big of a challenge to deal with all in one week. Some of the issues you come across or some of the follow-ups that you need to make will no doubt involve a much longer process over a more extended period of time. And that's fine and normal. Having said that, it also really matters to show that you are taking on board what you hear and that you are doing something about it. So if there's something that comes up, say, in a one-to-one with a team member this week, but you can't solve it this week, you do at least need to go back to that person or people and let them know what you're doing about it or what you plan to do about it, how long you think it will take, and what, if anything, they can do to help. Taking action, doing something beyond talking, and showing that you can follow through are so important to leadership. You don't want to be that fly-by-night leader, the all mouth and no action kind of person who gives the appearance of listening, but then never really acts on what they learn. They never follow through. They never follow up. If it's within your ability, do something about it. If it's not, find someone who can help. Either way, keep people in the loop so that they know you're working on their behalf and that their words did not fall on deaf ears. And that is 5 things you can try this week or next week to be a better leader for your team. And here they are again as a quick reminder. Check in with your people. Think about personal development for your team and for yourself. Catch up with other leaders in your organization. Get your finger on that pulse. Review the strategy and goals. Think about them, whether they're relevant and appropriate, and what progress you and your team are making. Act on what you learn. Follow up, follow through, communicate. Which brings us more or less to the end of part 4 and the end of this mini-series on the power of great leadership. We've covered some really big topics from a big perspective during this short run of 4 bonus episodes. So if you would like to learn more about any of the things that we've covered, about how to apply great leadership to your own role as a new manager, how to lead with integrity, how to build and support an effective, successful team, then good news, you can buy my short course today and learn more about the tactics, priorities, and behaviors that I've applied in my own leadership roles. The course is called the Leadership Starter Kit. It's designed to help you be more effective as a new manager, to establish yourself as a leader, and it will take you a few days at most, and you can get it now for less than $100 or £80 in the UK. If that sounds interesting, then please do pay a visit to www.leadernotaboss.co.uk. That link is also in the episode description, or if you're listening direct on the podcast website, then there will be a button somewhere that says sign up to the Leadership Short Course today. Whichever route you take, click on that link, click on that button, type in that address. You will arrive at a page where you can enter your details, and then I'll be in touch very soon to enroll you on the course. Now, for the added extra that I promised at the beginning of the episode. If you've been listening for a while, you will have heard me talk about the Integrity Leaders online leadership community. And if you're thinking about joining that community, then I'm pleased to now offer you a discount code. You'll get 15% off your membership fees for as long as you remain a member of the community. So forever, if you like. Just head over to the membership website now, sign up, and use the coupon code EARLY23 in all caps and numbers. I'll pop that code and the Integrity Leaders community link in the episode description again too. So you've got plenty to follow up on after this episode. Loads of options there. If you do get lost or stuck, just drop me a message and we'll have a chat. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I hope you've enjoyed the mini-series as a whole. I've had some really wonderful feedback already from other listeners. So once again, I really do appreciate your time and your support. And next week, we are back to the normal schedule with our weekly interviews. So Wednesday next week, Podcast Wednesday, I'll be talking to an AI ethicist by the name of Olivia Gamblin. She is founder of a company called Ethical Intelligence. And we're going to be discussing, funnily enough, the ethical considerations behind applying AI or other emerging technologies to a business application, the implications that that could have for leaders, and Olivia's thoughts on leadership more generally. It's going to be a super interesting one, and I'm really looking forward to it. I think there's going to be some great insights from Olivia there for tech head people as well as for lay people alike. So I'd really recommend tuning into that one, and I hope you'll join us for it next week. Well, that's all for this episode. Thank you again so much for listening. I will talk to you again next week. And in the meantime, remember to be a leader, not a boss.